你们好，对不起，我要说中文，开始我的中国话很不好，太一点。So, with your permission, I will continue in English. See, even I need a script. First of all, I'd like to say I think you guys are really lucky that this program exists. I wish I had a program like this when I got out of film school. I know what it's like to be in your shoes because I went to Los Angeles from St. Louis, Missouri, which is right in the middle of the US. And I went to film school, but I didn't know anybody in the film business. Only people I knew in Los Angeles were unemployed film students. So when I was about to get out of school and look for a job, I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do now? But luckily, I managed to get a job by somebody saw one of my student films, but they didn't want to hire me as a director. They wanted to hire me to work on the sound. So interestingly, my very first professional job was I was an assistant editor on looping a Chinese kung fu movie into English. So I guess I've always had a close spot in my heart for the Chinese film industry. Another story I'd like to say is earlier this year I went to a press conference with a friend here in Beijing, and he's trying to put together a co-production with Greece, shoot a Chinese film in Athens. And they had this big press conference, and they had the Chinese ambassador to Greece and the Greece ambassador to China or whatever, and they're all making the speeches and how great it was going to be. But I was struck that motion pictures or film, in a way, is an ambassador not to the official government, but movies are an ambassador to the common man. It's through movies that we see how other people live, you know? And that's why I think it's very important for China to get her films out to the rest of the world, so people can see how Chinese live and what your culture is, and can learn that in reality, we're all really just the same. I've had many Americans ask me questions about China, and many times they surprise me because they think of China the way it was maybe 50 years ago or 20 years ago or 100 years ago. And I think part of it is that most of the films we see there from China are these the costume pictures, you know, the period pictures. They're in the Han Dynasty or the Tang, and they have swords and that kind of riding horses. And you know, they don't see Beijing as it is today. It's a wonderful modern city, you know, and in ways it's more modern than Los Angeles because you tore down all the old stuff and built new buildings, whereas we have some older buildings in Los Angeles. So anyway, I think it's important that you get your movies made and get them out to the rest of the world so that the Americans will learn that you're not all running around with swords and doing kung fu. And conversely, from American movies, of course, you know that I'm a tough guy gangster. I've got a big gun right here, right? And I drive a fast car with a really big engine, right? When in reality, I'm totally different than that. But anyway, like my point is that people judge other countries based on what they see of them. So make movies about China as it is today. Make movies to show the world what it really is like here. Okay, so first of all, what is film? That's what my homework assignment was, to talk to you about what is film. First of all, I'd like to say, anything I say tonight, the only rule is that there are no rules, okay? Every film, everything is different, and so you can't say that this rule applies for everything. Now, when you say film, now, it used to be maybe 10, 20 years ago, film meant something that was shot on celluloid with photographic emulsion on top of it. But today, that less and less we have film, and more it's becoming digital. So I think when we say what is film, we have to forget the actual medium that we're recording on. That's no longer relevant. And also television is essentially film, just it's broadcast on a screen rather than projected on a big screen. But they're really the same. Film, so what makes film different from all the other mediums out there? Well, actually film, of course, is composed of many, many different mediums and arts in it. Certainly writing. Writing is one of the oldest things, telling stories. You know, at one point we were all sitting around a campfire and we're telling stories about how earlier in the day we killed that antelope and it was, you know, really hard and we fought and we managed to get the antelope and it was a really great one. And I think, you know, of course, people would exaggerate how good of a hunter they were. So that was probably the very first fictional story when somebody was telling how great of a hunter he was. And along those lines, I want to reiterate too what, I know Barry's going to say that tomorrow, he's the screenwriter, that in the end I think story and script is one of the most important things in a motion picture. Because if you don't have a good story, what's the point? If you don't have interesting characters, if you don't have a story that not only you want to tell, but other people can't wait to hear, then forget it. You might as well go and, you know, make shoes or something instead of motion pictures. Movies obviously have acting in them, which is another very old art. Plays go back to, at least I know in Greece, they go back to hundreds of years BC. So there's nothing new about that. And photography, that goes back to the 19th century. So that's not really new, but that's certainly another element of motion pictures is photography. Music, they all have music, and we all know that goes way back too. Sound design, that's more recent, obviously. We didn't really have good sound systems until the 20th century. And movie sound kind of developed in concert with radio. So, you know, that all kind of happened starting about the mid-20s. So that's fairly recent, but still, that's just one element to movies. So what really makes movies different from all these other mediums? 2 nights ago, when we came here, we went to see a short version of the traditional opera called the Peony Pavilion. It's a traditional Chinese opera. You may have heard of it, or you may have seen it. It was beautiful. The acting was wonderful. The actors did precisely all the things. It was really, the makeup was beautiful. Everything was great. But while I was watching it, I found that it was so exciting and so interesting that I didn't know where to look. The main actress was interesting and, you know, very worth watching. And then there was another actress who played her servant, and she was slightly comic relief, you'd call it. And she was interesting too. And then periodically, I had to look up at the subtitles because I don't speak Chinese very well. And so I had to look up at the subtitles. And then other times I'd find myself looking at the musicians who were on the side playing. So ideally, I should have been able to look at all of them at the same time, but that was impossible. So I think what makes movies different is that movies are directed as to where you're supposed to look. It's the only medium, like I said, including television, it's the only medium where the director or the filmmaker tells you what you need to see and what you need to hear at any one time. Initially, of course, for those of you who know the history of movies, originally movies were just, they put up a camera, similar to that camera right out there, and they would record a stage play. Or maybe not even a play, just something like a train coming into a station or something. But if it was a fictional thing, they just would put up a camera in what would be considered a good seat in the theater and record it. And so in the end, it was just a recorded version of what it would be like if you went to see the play in the regular theater. But starting about 1903, with movies like Life of American Fireman and The Great Train Robbery, the director of those films, Edwin S. Porter, decided he could put different shots together and tell a more complex story, not just filmed in one place and one setup. And as a result, after that, then they figured out, like, well, we could cut within the scene. We don't just have one camera within the scene. We can move the camera in the middle of the scene. We don't have to have it just sitting there. We can start there, and then we could put the camera over there. And this is, to me, when film really became film and ceased to be just a recording of real life. Now, of course, films have become very sophisticated due to cutting, both internal cutting within scenes and external cutting. We have very complex stories can be told. Movies like, Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction, where it jumps around in time. It's not just a linear story where we start and we follow it and then it stops. More recently, there's, Christopher Nolan had Memento, which was where we find out about a person's background in little bits and pieces. And then multiple stories, like Chris Nolan's last film, Inception, from last year, where the movie is taking place on several different dream levels at the same time, and they intercut between them. And if it's done right, we know what's going on. We understand what's going on. If it's done wrong, of course, we're totally confused. But anyway, so this to me, this is the basic thing of film. And the first thing you have to do as a film director is decide, what do we see and what do we hear? When you have a script, it says something like, the living room, Bob enters and walks over to Shirley and says, "I'm hungry," and she says, "You jerk, I saw you last night with Yolanda," or whatever the story is, But it just doesn't tell you what you're going to see. It just tells you what happens. And it's up to you as the directors of tomorrow to decide, where is the camera going to be? What are we going to see? How are you going to cover? We call it coverage in English. How are you going to cover the scene? And of course, you have infinite choices in this, because you can put the camera almost anywhere. You could hang the camera from the ceiling. You could have the camera shooting through a hole in the floor. There's really no rules that says what you have to do. But you have to make a choice. You have to decide what it is you're going to show us. I'd like to read a quote here. This is from Alfred Hitchcock, the famous suspense, murder, whatever you want to call it, filmmaker. He said, "I don't understand why we have to experiment with film. I think everything should be done on paper. A musician has to do it. A composer puts down a lot of little dots, and then beautiful music comes out. And I think students should be taught to visualize. That's the one thing missing in all this. The one thing the student has to learn is that there's a rectangle up there on the screen and that it has to be filled." So that as a director is your main duty, is to decide what is going to be on that little screen, regardless of whether it's square or it's longer or whatever. And I would like to say that in America, you call them Jianying, but in America we call them motion pictures. And I would like to emphasize that the key word here is pictures. I think the more visual films are, the better. It's easy to just sort of have people sitting around talking to one another over and over, just words. But I think films are much more exciting if they're composed of pictures. A good example of this is a film I shot a number of years ago where a guy is the script said that a guy, it's about a man and he thinks he might be crazy and is really a murderer who's been killing people, but he doesn't realize it. And so he suddenly gets thoughts in his head. This is what was written in the script. Well, how do you show thoughts in somebody's head? that's something you can't do just by filming an actor. You have to have some sort of pictures. So I figured that what I had him do was reach in his pocket and find a knife. Okay, it turns out later that it's all a fantasy in his mind. The knife really wasn't there, but in his mind the knife was there. So finding a large knife in your pocket, if you don't normally carry a knife, is pretty scary. So you have to think in terms of visuals. And I think actually a good thing to do is study, if you have the opportunity, is the old silent films. Particularly the later ones from the mid-20s up till the early era of sound, because these are movies that had to depend largely just on pictures. But they were able to tell pretty complex stories, and so I think they're good role models. Along that line, I worked on Raiders of the Lost Ark. I think you all know that. I did the sound work on that. But the big chase scene, at the truck, and Indy's riding the horse, and he gets on the truck and he fights, and the Germans, and they're crawling under the truck and all. This scene was shot mainly silently. The only thing they rolled sound on was the close-ups of the stars in the cab of the truck. So the rest was shot silent. All the sound was added later. So essentially, it was a silent movie, a silent action movie that we added sound into. And conversely, if I was to take a movie from the late 20s or even earlier and add a soundtrack to it, it would probably be fairly successful, acceptable today. So I would like to say with sound, that sound doesn't necessarily just mean talking. Sound can also be sound effects, the noises that are the environment, an unusual sound, something of that nature, or it could be music, or it could be nothing. Sometimes even silence is very effective, because we're so used to hearing some sort of sound in movies at every one moment. If there's total silence, it's very disconcerting. It really throws people off. Anyway, gotta turn this guy on. Okay. We all know that music is composed of basically the same 8 notes, at least Western music. All songs in Western music are composed of the same 8 tones. So we have basic sounds, basic things in film. Now, a lot of you are going to know all this, so bear with me. I'm sorry. Some of you probably have gone to film school and know all this stuff, but others of you don't, so I'm going to brush through some of this stuff. So an establishing shot. It's like basically a very wide shot, and it shows you the location, so the audience knows, where are we? Okay, we're in a sort of middle-class housing area, and there's a woman standing in the front yard who looks a lot like my wife. Then this is I call it a wide long shot, but a long shot. And for many years, all the early movies were basically shot in this sort of format. The entire scene would be acted out in a shot like this, where you'd see the entire actor or all of the actors. Here's a little closer version. And then a medium shot. The directors, again, this kind of goes back to the history, but the directors started moving the camera in closer because they realized by getting the camera in closer, you could see the faces of the actors better, and you were able to tell emotions better, because that's what we all react to. And then, of course, we have a close-up, which is even closer, and then an extreme close-up, or sometimes we call it an insert, because it may not even be this may not be the star's hand. This could be somebody else's hand standing in for the star. So this is basically your entire vocabulary or grammar of film, is these type of shots. Everything else is sort of a variation. Like this close-up, if you had put the camera in the back, so it was photographing from the where the actress would be, then we call that a point of view shot, meaning the way the actor is seeing it. But it's still a close-up. So there's it's just feels different because the angle you're doing it gives you a different feeling. So, where was I? Oh, yes, I was saying that the reason we have the close-ups initially is so that you can see the actors better to get their emotion. In the long shots, they have to kind of overact. If you see, especially you see the really early silent films, people were really overacting because it came from the stage where somebody way up there had to be able to see what I'm doing. So that's why you get the things, I love you. That kind of thing, you know? Now, today, if you see in a movie like that, you think, oh my God, what a terrible actor that guy is, you know? But in the early films, this was very common. And, the closer we got, the closer the camera moves in, the less the actor has to do, at least as in the sense of scale. It's the smaller the acting has to be, you know? Like, okay, those of you in the back row, I kind of move my eyebrow. I don't know, can you see? I kind of move my eyebrow a little bit. You know, or I just kind of look down, motion a little bit. Now, you can't see that probably way back there, and it wouldn't work in a play. But if I had a camera close on me, that would look pretty big, you know? Just the way I move my eye would register very strong as to what my emotion was in the scene. So you have to be careful with actors, you know. The closer you move the camera in, the less they have to do. It becomes more internal, you know. They're still acting, but it becomes more internal. And the further away, like if you had a camera, like in my original shot, the long shot there, then you might have to have them do more. Like if the person was coming out and was concerned that the lemon tree hasn't been growing well enough or something, she might have to do something a little more exaggerated, like going, oh, like that or something. Because you might, with the first long shot, you may not see it unless she does that. And interestingly, some of this goes back to before we were these modern, sophisticated people living in the beautiful city of Beijing. We were apes, and we were sitting somewhere in Africa in little groups. And research has shown that apes react to emotions from their face, much like we do. They smile, they scowl, they like that, and very similar to what we do. And so I think there's something ingrained. And the apes seem to know this from when they're very young. So there's something, I think, inside people that react to all this that we still have in our DNA. And so we react to close-ups. And a close-up can be very, very powerful, in fact, because normally we don't get too close to people, right? We mainly see the world in sort of a medium shot or long shots. But the only time we're really getting close to a person is maybe like our boyfriend or girlfriend. We want to kiss them or something. We get pretty close, and maybe that's okay. But the other thing is again, going back to apes, is a lot of times if you are confronting somebody, you stuck your face out at them. You kind of put your face in fact, we even have an expression in English called, you know, in your face, where somebody is confronting you. So a close-up can be very powerful, but it also can be sometimes so powerful that you don't want to keep having close-ups. You want to pull back and have a little less intensity at times, because otherwise, you know, sometimes films like have, you know, close-up after close-up after close-up, and it feels good to cut back, to pull back, and be a little wider. Particularly in television, they tend to use a lot of close-ups because a lot of people's TV screens aren't that big. So by being close, you can see the actors a little better. But on a big screen, if you're doing a movie for a big screen, all of a sudden that close-up that looks pretty good on a small television looks huge. You know, somebody's nose is giant or something. So you have to be careful. The next thing I'd like to talk about is, as far as the choice, is 3D. Now, we all know that 3D is not very popular right now, but I'm assuming that these films we're going to be making through this program are not going to be 3D because it's kind of expensive. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't think in terms of 3D, because you can do 3D on flat. Let me do the next picture here. Okay, here, this is from Citizen Kane, an excellent film if you haven't seen it, Orson Welles. As you can see, Agnes Moorehead, the actress in the foreground, is very close to the camera. Now, it isn't true 3D in the sense that you feel like she's way closer to you, like if you have the glasses on, but it makes it feel sort of 3D. It makes it feel very deep. You can see because she's in this scene, the person talking is the guy in the background, Everett Sloan. So our eye kind of goes to him, but at the same time, we're watching her face in the foreground. Here's another one from the same movie. The people in the foreground, and notice way in the background is an actor. And that person talks at times, and it's very deep. It's a big 3D feeling. So 3D, here's another shot from Best Years of Our Lives. So you can do 3D, and you really should do 3D because it helps make your films feel deep. It helps make your films feel more expensive or luxurious or whatever you want to call it without having to have true 3D.